Hello, welcome to the Home Modification Occupational Therapy Alliance HMOTA meeting. And tonight we're going to have a special guest, Barbara Kornblau. Barbara has a long list of wonderful qualifications. She's an occupational therapist and she's an attorney, as she said. She's been an entrepreneurial leader. She's worked quite a bit with local, state, and national health policies. I just don't even know where to start with all the different leadership roles and experience you've had. So without further ado, let me introduce you, Barbara, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey that I haven't.
Started out, I always wanted to be an attorney because I wanted to work with advocacy for people with disabilities. And when I was going to OT school, people who had law degrees were driving taxi cabs, which a lot of them are doing again, except now it's Lyft and Uber. So I decided to become an occupational therapist first, and then I went back to law school. And I ended up going to law school at night because I was in a car accident on the way to law school. So I worked during the day as an OT, and at night I went to law school. And so I've kind of been doing both on and off, depending on where I am. And I'm now living in the Washington, D.C. metro area because I came here to do, somebody needs to mute. I came here to do a Robert Johnson Health Policy Fellowship on the Hill. I worked for Senators Harkin and Rockefeller, and I left to be a dean in Michigan for a little while and then decided I really wanted to come back here. So I'm licensed to practice law in Miami or in Florida, and I still go down there to for certain things. I represent people, OTs, before the licensure board. I used to litigate under the ADA and Fair Housing Act, but I haven't done that for a while. And now I'm also on the faculty at Florida A&M. I Skype into class and I teach. So I'm going to talk first about the Fair Housing Act, because if you're doing home modifications, aging in place, whatever we're calling it at the moment, you need to understand the Fair Housing Act. And I find that it's something a lot of OTs don't know about, because I teach my students and they go out to do field work and they go and do a home assessment and say to the person, you know, you need grab bars. And the person says, oh, my landlord won't let me have grab bars. And my student says, oh, by law they have to. And the OT with them says, what are you talking about? And they say, well, Dr. Kornblau taught us about the Fair Housing Act, and they explain it. And several times I've been flown out to, like, the VA in Los Angeles flew me out to do a 1 day on Fair Housing Act and ADA and some other things. So, you know, it's something that not everybody knows about. So I'm going to start with that and then talk about marketing to attorneys and marketing to others, because you know, you'll hear me say it, I just think that this is an area where we need to market as a profession, and we're not. And having individual people marketing is helpful for, you know, sort of helpful for your practice, but I think the world needs to know what occupational therapy's role is in this area. So I think we'll talk more about that. So Fair Housing Act, I'll give you a little case study. Jennifer lives in and rents an apartment in a large apartment complex that has a pool. She has fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis of the knee, and low back pain. And as a result of her chronic pain, she experiences fatigue, and she also has some balance issues from time to time. So the saga continues. As part of her rehab program, her OT makes a home visit and recommends the following. She recommends that she install grab bars in the bathroom and around the bathtub, that she use a bath bench in the shower with a long-handled shower hose, and that she use the pool daily if possible for a water exercise program. So Jennifer thinks this is great. You know, a whole new life before her. So she speaks to the landlord about the home modifications, and he tells her that he doesn't want grab bars in his apartments, so she can't make the changes. And when she tells him about her use of the pool, and she tells him that members of her church are going to come help her get in and out of the pool, he reminds her that they have a no guest policy on weekends in the pool, because they don't want people, you know, this is an apartment of older adults. They don't want people's grandchildren peeing in the pool on weekends, so they have this policy. So what can she do? Well, the law is there to protect her. The Fair Housing Amendments Act passed in 1989, And the Fair Housing Act, up to that point, it prohibited discrimination in housing based upon race, creed, sex, religion, and national origin. And then it was amended in 1989 to extend protection to individuals with disabilities, which was called handicaps in the law at that time. We don't use that word anymore. It's people with disabilities. So under this law, discrimination means to deny or make unavailable a sale or rental because of the disability of a buyer or renter, or the disability of an intended resident, or the disability of somebody associated with a person with a disability. So if you are an older couple and you want to move into an apartment and you have children, adult children who have disabilities, and they don't want those kind of people on the premises, they can't not rent to you. That's considered discrimination. They also can't make inquiries on the application as to whether or not the sale or rental is a person with a disability. And if you substitute person with a disability, you can't discriminate in rental. You can't ask if somebody is brown, black, purple, from Mars or Venus or any of those things, and it's kind of the same sort of thing. It's irrelevant. Discrimination also means changing the terms, conditions, or privileges of the sale or rental, or the provision of services or facilities in connection with the sale or rental of a dwelling. So you couldn't say you can't use the pool because you have a disability. That would be changing the terms because everybody else is allowed to use the pool. The landlord may, if it's reasonable, condition permission for modifications on the person's agreeing to restore the conditions to the way they were before the modification, but it has to be reasonable. So is it reasonable to take out grab bars and put it back? Sometimes it is, sometimes it may not be. If it's apartments that are mostly for older adults, you could probably argue that it's not reasonable because the next person may need to put them in. But there may be times where it may be reasonable. Someone puts in an automatic door or something like that. The landlord just doesn't want that because he doesn't want the next renter to think they're living in a place that's just for quote unquote the handicapped, and I'm using that on purpose in that context. But the landlord can ask for that. They can increase your security deposit because of modifications, but they can hold funds in an interest-bearing escrow account for the restoration. So they can say, for example, that if you're going to widen the doorway to the bathroom, that he wants it restored when you're done, it's going to cost $2,000, and he can put that in an interest-bearing escrow account. He may also condition permission for the modification on the provision of a reasonable description of the modification and assurances that it's going to be performed with permits, it's going to look good, basically it's going to be done to code, and all of those things that the landlord has a right to ask that it be done. And it's probably things that we would want done anyway, and the person is going to use it once done. Now, the landlord or condo board must make reasonable accommodations in rules, policies, practices, or services in order to give the person with a disability equal opportunity to use and enjoy the dwelling, including public common use areas. And this is the pool example. So if you can't use the pool without somebody assisting you into the pool, like in our example, then the condo can't, or the landlord can't have a rule that says that you can't use the pool with help. You can't have someone help you into the pool. The other one is, this one I used to have in Miami all the time when I lived down there, because every condo board had 10 retired attorneys from up north who all thought they knew what they were talking about, and they didn't. So one condo, for example, they gave out parking spaces based on seniority and whether or not you were on the board. So I had a client who wanted a parking space that was close to the door because he had trouble walking, and they didn't want to accommodate him. But under the Fair Housing, they have to make reasonable accommodations to their policies. And the policy in practice is to allow him, is to give the board members and the people with seniority priority, but they can't do that because that policy doesn't allow for exceptions for people with disabilities. So I spent a lot of time with attorneys who didn't know what they were doing when it came to fair housing. So I would tell the attorney, you have to settle this because you're going to lose. They'd say, oh no, my client's right. I said, well, you may think your client's right. You could build this file as much as you want. Let me know when you're ready, when you're finished billing the file, and we'll settle, because you're going to lose if we go to court. I promise you. I know what I'm talking about, and you've never seen the Fair Housing Act in your life. So most of the time that's what happened. They would bill the condo association a few $1,000s and call me up and say, okay, we're ready to settle, and I would get what I wanted. Now, some examples of the classic ones are service dogs and parking, and I told you about the parking situation. Service dogs, they have to allow service animals, but the problem is that they don't allow dogs for everyone else. And where's the dog going to poop? That becomes the big problem. Where's the dog going to poop, and who's going to clean up after it? So, there may be some discussion about an area where the dog can go. The person will clean it up, or they'll have a dog walker, whatever it is. The other thing is classic home modifications. They don't want the grab bars or whatever it is. And reserve parking spaces where they don't want to give somebody reserved parking space, but they're going to have to do it because they have to have a space that meets the needs. So if the person has a van with a lift, there has to be space for the lift to come out. Now, one of the big differences between the ADA and the Fair Housing Act is the landlord does not have to pay and make the accommodations. That's important. Under the ADA, the employer, the place of public accommodation, has to make the accommodations and pay for it. Under the Fair Housing Act, they have to allow the tenant to make the accommodations, and the tenant pays for it. There are some exceptions to that, and that is if the housing unit has a place of public accommodation in it. So for example, what I would encounter in Florida a lot is you'd have a condo that would have a restaurant that was open to the public. People would come in one side of the restaurant, eat, and go out the back, and they'd be on the beach. Those places were places of public accommodation. So if you lived in the building and you needed an automatic door opener where you could press a button and the door opens to let you in your scooter or wheelchair, you could argue that you needed that to get to the restaurant, not to your apartment. If you argued that the restaurant was open to the public, then the landlord would have to pay for it because it becomes an ADA issue. So I just want to clarify that a little bit. The difference between the ADA, you don't pay for it as the person who needs it. It's paid for by the owner, by the person in business, by the restaurant, by the whoever's providing a service or business. But under the Fair Housing Act, you as the tenant or occupier, you have to pay for the changes that you want. Now, what can you do about a Fair Housing Act problem as an OT? These used to be very easy. Okay, you can file a complaint with HUD. You just Google, how do I file a fair housing complaint? And you fill out the forms online. And you can do that. You don't have to be a lawyer. Now, I can't tell you what's happening now. I don't want to get into politics, but these complaints, I've never had a problem with this. It didn't matter who was president. It didn't matter who was head of HUD. But the head of HUD now is a brain surgeon, and I don't know, he's saying some crazy things about raising rents in low-income housing and taking away services. So I don't know if they are focusing as much on this as they used to. I don't know. But like I said, under every other president, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, I never had a problem. I would file it and they would investigate, and I never lost a case because the condos and the landlords don't know the law. And you know as much about the law now as I do, or as much as you need to know. You will always be in the right. As long as it's 3 units or more, and it's not, the exception is, I forgot what they call it, Mrs. O'Reilly exception or something, going back to the days when if you live in like an apartment, or a dwelling, and you have 3 units and you live there, kind of like not renting out rooms, but sort of renting out little apartments, that's another exception. So we're really talking about this, standard apartment buildings or multiple dwellings, and eight units or something. But it's that, I'm trying to think of the name. It's not Mrs. O'Reilly, but it's something. It was an Irish name, going back to the day when people had, rented out rooms, and that they kept that as an exception. So, okay, anybody have questions on fair housing?
I have a question. Is there any funding to assist with modifications to an apartment and putting them back into order?
Not under the Fair Housing Act, but I would think that there are certain places that you might look for funding. So for example, the Centers for Independent Living. If you're not familiar with those are funded by the federal government to help advocate for people with disabilities. They may know of some funding that's available in your area. And to find your local Center for Independent Living, if you go to NCIL, NCIL.org, which stands for the National Centers for Independent Living, something like that. But NCIL.org, and they have a listing of all of the NCIL, the independent living centers in the country. So you can look up your local ones. For those of you in Chicago, you probably know about the one in Chicago because it's the best one in the country. And I don't live there, I can say that. I work with them a lot on policy things. They're excellent advocates, and if there's funding, they know about it. There may be a local agency, they may have some funding for it through some sort of a grant project, but that's who I would check with to see if there's any funding to make those modifications. And it's a national group funded by the federal government, and they know most of the resources for people with disabilities in the area. The other place I would check is the federal government pays for lawyers for people with disabilities to represent in federal programs, in some of them. And that group is the National Disability Rights Network, NDRN.org. And each state has one of these law firms. Some states have more than one. And if you call them, they may also know if there's funding available for this. So those are the two resources that I would go to find out if there's funding in your area.
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes, this is Brandy.
Okay.
Does the Fair Housing Act apply to people who are renting a whole house from a landlord?
Probably not, because that goes in that exception for the 3 units or less.
Okay.
So that, or the Mrs. O'Reilly, well, not the Mrs. O'Reilly exception, but just the 3 units or less exception. I would still, I would kind of ask them anyway, because they may not know. So I would kind of say, well, I thought under the Fair Housing Act you had to do this. It can't hurt to try.
Good point.
You mention a law and people get nervous. And if you say, when I leave, I'll put it back. Other questions? Okay, and I really want to stress that in the past, and I don't know if this is happening now because I haven't filed one of these for a long time, but I always had my Fair Housing Act cases solved by HUD. They came in and said, you can't do this. It got fixed. 9 times out of 10, unless, if there was a lawyer on the other side, like I said, I told them to bill for a while, bill what you want and let me know when you're done. But it used to be because of the way the government treated these. And again, Democrats and Republicans treated these the same, whether it was Bush or Clinton or Obama, whoever was in the White House. I never had a problem winning, getting these cases to win through filing them administratively. So, and you don't have to be a lawyer. It's very simple, and your clients will love you for it if it works. And it should, I'm hoping it still works, but like I said, I haven't filed any lately. So, okay, so I'm going to move on to marketing.
I just had a quick comment
Oh,
about
sure.
one of my patients I had in Manhattan. She had cerebral palsy, and she lived in a very large building, and the landlord had fought with her a lot about modifications, and I was trying to help her, and UCP actually helped her a lot, and spoke with the landlord, and they gave her a representative. So I think, sometimes the specific disabilities are happy, depends, but are happy to get involved if needed.
Yeah, and I just, I gave you general ones because it was a general question, but that's really important that national organizations and local branches of national organizations for specific disabilities are happy to help. And there are a lot of groups that are really good at advocacy. So, that's certainly a good resource. And, the other thing, I don't know, I'm also a big believer in, shaming people when they do things that are stupid. But, that's one option too. Not always the best, but sometimes it comes down to that. Now, in a place like New York City, they also have an office. Mayor's has in the mayor's office is an office for people with disabilities. That's another resource. So it really, depends where you are. But
Okay.
the resources I gave you, they all have local or state entities from those national websites. Okay, now, let's see. Okay, so I want to talk about marketing. I'm going to talk about marketing in general, and I'm going to talk about marketing to attorneys. And what I'm concerned about, Karen and I talked about the concept of aging in place versus marketing home modifications. And I think that one of our problems is that we need to market this more as a profession. And, everybody marketing individually is great, but we need to market the profession. You market the profession locally and you market yourselves as well. But the problem is that people, goes back to people don't know what occupational therapy is. We find people jobs, and that's great if you're doing workers' comp stuff. But the concept of having people understand that we help people live in their homes, and we help people age in place, and we help people live normal lives as normal as possible. So I really believe that we need a bold marketing campaign as a profession. I'm not sure where that comes from. I'm kind of thinking that, this group could kind of coordinate some stuff. But what I'm looking at, I mean, for attorneys, I kind of did another slide, but this is an example of, who you're marketing to, and I'll come back to this. But the idea of marketing to adult children, my favorite marketing story, when Miami Beach used to be old people before it was cool, now it's like South Beach, wow, cool. A social worker put an ad in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and said, "Are your elderly parents living in Miami Beach? Are you worried about them being safe? Are you worried about them making their doctor's appointments? Are you worried about them filling their prescriptions? I can help you." And she had an incredible practice, which eventually had to move up to Palm Beach County because that's where all the old people moved. But she was, bringing money hand over fist, and she convinced everybody that that was, her role. And I just think that that's something that's really our role. And when Karen and I talked, and she said that the problem, her perception, maybe some of you as well, is that aging in place, everybody's doing aging in place. Social workers, this workers, those people. And I think the problem is that we need to get out that occupational therapy, aging in place is occupational therapy. I think home modifications doesn't make sense to a lot of people. It makes sense to us because that's what we're in. But I think that aging in place is a hot buzzword. So how do we get that out? I think marketing to the adult children, courts often have court-appointed guardians. I think that that's an area that we need to market to that we haven't. Letting the judges who do guardianship know that we're around so they can order us. Local news is a big one. Now, obviously in Chicago, you're not going to get on the news there necessarily, although you can try. But there are other places. When I was a dean in Flint, Michigan, and I was on the news all the time. They needed someone to talk about the Affordable Care Act. I had just come from DC and I helped write part of it. So whenever they needed someone, they went to me. Local news in smaller places, they're always looking for people to feature and for news stories. This is a news story. How do you keep your parents at home? You go on the local news and you talk about it and you give examples. I think that national magazines is another one. I mean, why hasn't anybody written, and I guess I'm just as guilty, I'm not pointing a finger at anyone, but why haven't we done articles in like Women's Day or some of the other women's magazines or the AARP newsletter talking about occupational therapy and what occupational therapy can do for you or for your parents? I mean, this is the kind of bold marketing that I'm talking about, that we need as a profession. We need to market our own businesses, but if we market boldly nationally, then it's easy to come in with our own business and say, oh, and I do this too. Or you get an article in a national magazine and you say, here's what we're doing, go on local news, talk about it, and here's how this works. So I think that's, kind of big. I'm going to come back to the attorneys thing. Now, individual marketing, the other one that kind of bothers me that I don't, and some of you may be doing this. So if you're doing it, that's great. Attorneys go to retirement communities and they do free presentations on estate planning. You know, I'll do your will, I'll come to your house and I'll do your will and your estate plan and your durable power of attorney and all that stuff. Why aren't OTs going to the same retirement communities and talking about aging in place? I'm going to keep you from falling and breaking a hip. If you fall and break a hip, you die within 2 years. You don't want to die within 2 years. I can help you prevent that. I mean, that's what the evidence shows. So that's something. And then while you're doing that, you can market to the attorney who's doing estate planning at the same place. And you can explain to him that part of your estate plan is aging in place and safety. So your estate, part of your estate plan is staying out of nursing homes as long as you can by staying in one piece and staying safe and having safety in your home. So it kind of, you know, goes together. Now, the main thing is to reach the purse string holders, and one way to do that is by speaking at Rotary clubs and other service clubs. They need speakers every week. They're always looking for someone. I was president of my Rotary Club when I was president of AOTA. My club had a rule that you couldn't say no when you were elected president, so that wasn't a fun time for me. But we had speakers from all kinds of things. When we ran out of them, I'd have my students come in and talk about OT. So everybody in my Rotary Club knew what occupational therapy was. They knew what home assessments were. They knew a lot. They knew about autism and OT. They knew a lot of things. You know, these service clubs are a great source because not only are there attorneys in the clubs and accountants who are looking out for older people's money and people who serve as guardians, but they all have parents, and many of them are aging baby boomers. So they're looking for services, and they're looking for services for their parents at the same time. So I think that's really, really significant and important and a good place to present. And if you do live in a place like Chicago, there's probably 20 Rotary clubs in Chicago, so you can do the whole city. And maybe those of you who are from Chicago can get together and do something together and share referrals. I don't know how you do that if it's split up by the part of where you are in the Chicagoland area, et cetera, but that's certainly something. Now, publishing somewhere, and I say somewhere because I'm not talking about I'm talking about local newspapers, throwaway papers, things that come in the mail. If there is a local health plan that publishes stuff, anything you can get in to publish, that's certainly helpful because you can share that, you can take it with you. It makes it look like you're a big deal. But it gets the name out there. And even if you're not just getting your name out there, you're getting OT out there. And that to me is really important. I mean, I'd love to see this group put together a plan, like a national marketing plan to get everyone to know that occupational therapists are the best ones to do aging in place / home modifications, that this is what we do, this is why we do it, and this is the benefits. Obviously, the internet, Facebook and Instagram is real important. There is someone who has a video on YouTube of a home visit. I'm trying to think of her name. I should have put it in here. I use it in one of my presentations on starting a practice. So having a video on what a home modification. Oops. Sorry, accidentally turned my mic down. Okay, having a video of a home assessment or an aging in place, or just you describing it and putting it on the internet, and then marketing on Facebook, Instagram, and I don't need to explain it to you. I'm sure you're all well aware of internet marketing. Twitter, I'm a big Twitter. That stuff really helps. And then the other one that to me is real important is houses of worship. On Sunday after church, you could give a presentation on how to keep your parents safe, or in whatever religious affiliation you have. Houses of worship are always putting on community, presentations to the community, and that that'll hit attorneys, that'll hit the people who know what they're talking about, the aging baby boomers, purse strings, etc. So I think that's really important. Now, marketing to attorneys. The first thing is, what's the attorney's specialty? And let me go back to here. These are just some of them. The estate planning attorneys, and what they do is they do wills, and they do durable power of attorney. They do advanced planning for what you want. They may do a living will, and it may, home modification may be part of a living will. If I can no longer use the bathroom by myself, I don't want to be alive anymore, whatever. However people decide to put that. Personal injury is another area. Why? Because when a personal injury attorney has a case, they have to figure out what they're going to ask, how much money they want. And included in how much money they want is going to be, what does it cost to modify the home? So that's an area that you can look at. The same thing with malpractice. Because of malpractice, somebody is left in a wheelchair or limited in mobility, whatever it is, balance, and the malpractice attorney wants to know, what are the costs involved? So they may ask you to look at the house and tell you what the costs are that are involved. Workers' comp is the same thing. When I was a workers' comp attorney, I did a lot of workers' comp assessments as an OT, looking at what does this person need in her home because of her accident. So, I did everything from recommend lowering the cabinets in the kitchen so that she could reach things, to roll and shower, or, whatever it was, to look at, what do you need? How much does it cost? The other kind of attorneys, elder care attorneys who do Medicaid planning, some of that stuff. Some of the elder care attorneys also do the estate planning, but some of them look at the Medicaid planning and where do I want to end up, and how do I want to have somebody live with me at home? Do I want to be in a nursing home? Some of that stuff. So you can help with what do people need to be able to stay in their home as long as possible. SS is Social Security. You may be involved in testifying at a Social Security hearing. I do a lot with Social Security and what used to be called the Institute of Medicine. They fund studies, and I've been the OT on a couple of consensus panels. And the first one was very interesting. They wanted to know the impact of assistive devices on people getting Social Security. Now, that may seem pretty obvious. You want to say, well, if somebody has this device, they can work. Somebody has that device, they can work. But what we looked at was, for example, if you get a talking device, a talking board or whatever, when you're in school, when you graduate, they take it away. You don't get to keep that. Same thing with any device they give you. So that was one factor. The other factor was that in some parts of the country, you have a therapist who can prescribe a fancy wheelchair, high-tech wheelchair or high-tech device. You have a vendor who can sell it, and you have someone who can train the person to use it. But if you think about what the country looks like, we don't have that all over, because we have rural places and some places in Alaska where there isn't a therapist for miles. So Social Security can't use the standard of the device because it can't be used all over the country. So you can testify at Social Security hearings about the type of devices, this person, if she had this, could do it, but that's not available where we live. Or you might testify that with this device that she's now using, she's able to do X, Y, but not Z. So she wouldn't be able to work because she can't do Z, whatever that is. So that you might get involved with testifying at Social Security hearings to help explain how the person is functioning. So let's look a little bit more. So what's the attorney's specialty? We just looked at a bunch of different specialties. You need to speak to them in the language of their specialty. So you may need to read up on some of that stuff. I mean, we know it's obvious that a malpractice attorney is looking at, how did the person screw up? Now, I was an expert witness in a malpractice case a few months ago, where the OT took a guy, it was home care, all right, home health. What's the rule in home health? You're not supposed to take people outside, because that's why they're homebound, because it's hard to take them outside. So she took the person wanted to go to the gym in their condo. So she walked into the gym in the condo, no gate belt. Well, that's a problem, because the PT said high risk of falls. The nurse said high risk of falls. The nurse and the PT both had gate belt on the guy. She walked him outside to the gym without the gate belt, and the guy fell in the gym. So what do we need to know about this? What's the specialty? What is that attorney interested in? They're interested in, if the standard care fell below what a reasonable, prudent occupational therapist would do. So you want to look at what's their language. If they're talking about elder law, what are you providing that an elder law attorney wants, and how can you help them? If it's workers' comp, what does the person need to be able to function in their home, and how does the workers' compensation carrier have to, why do they have to provide that? Because the person was able to do that before, they can't do it now. In order to do it, they need these things. So therefore, the workers' compensation carrier has to pay for it because they have to provide people with devices that they need so they can function the way they functioned before to the greatest extent possible, or whatever the standard is in your state, but it's usually something like that. So you need to focus on how you can help their case, their clients, or their marketing. So if you're working with an elder law attorney, you could be selling services together. You're marketing all the elder law services that you need, the will and all that stuff, and Medicaid, and the services of an occupational therapist who will come into your home and make it safe for you to live there. And we'll look at what are the kinds of things that you're having difficulty doing that you'd like to be able to do, and the OT will make it easier for you to be able to do those things, show you another way, rearrange your kitchen, whatever it needs to be to help you to be able to do those things. Now, how do you find or reach attorneys? Well, service clubs, local bar association meetings, and networking groups. Some of you mentioned networking groups are excellent. And I think that they're, when you join some of these things, I mean, theoretically, everybody knows what a lawyer does. They really don't, but they think they do. And everybody thinks they know what an accountant does. They don't really know necessarily. Everybody thinks they know what a family practice doctor does. There's certain titles that people just know what they are. Nobody knows what an occupational therapist is. They may know because their kid had OT in school, but that doesn't translate. Or they may know because their grandmother had a stroke, but that doesn't necessarily translate either. So it's interesting, when I started going to the Hill to do Hill Day kind of advocacy visits. I've been in OT for about 40 years. So when I started going 30 years ago, no one knew what OT was. Now when I go, everybody knows what OT is, because if you've ever been to the Hill, most of the staff are in their 20s. So that's who runs the country, is kids in their 20s. And they all have a sister, brother, or cousin who's autistic. So when they think, or grandmother had a stroke, so that's their how they associate OT. When you say, "Hi, I'm here to talk about occupational therapy. Do you know what occupational therapy is?" And they all say, "Yeah, I've got a brother, sister, or cousin who's autistic, or my grandmother, broke her hip or had a stroke and she had OT." So we need to bring that down to a different level to make it meaningful to these, to attorneys, to explain it in a way. So if I'm talking to a workers' comp attorney, I don't just introduce myself, or there's a workers' comp attorney in my networking group. I don't just introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm an occupational therapist." I introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm an occupational therapist. And what I do is I work with people on workers' comp, and I help attorneys decide what kinds of services and what kinds of equipment they should use in their claims against the workers' comp carrier." I'm going to go talk to that person who says that. Or personal injury, same thing. I work with personal injury attorneys, and I look at the types of services and devices that people need to settle their claims. I'm going to go talk to that person. Or I work with older adults, and I help them age in place. I look at what they need in their homes to be able to stay in their homes as long as possible and be as independent as possible. And I work with a lot of elder lawyers on that. You could fib a little bit. You can say, or that's something that elder lawyers might be interested in. So that's okay. Speaking their language and reaching the people that are in that group, instead of, I would never introduce myself to anybody as, "Hi, I'm an occupational therapist," and stop there. And I'm sure most of you don't, but that's, I think that's really important advice, because nobody knows what I do. No matter what I do, they don't know what I do. A lot of OTs don't know what I do and don't understand that what I do is OT necessarily. I live in Northern Virginia, and I called the Frank Gaynor's head of licensure board for DC, and I said, "I'm going to be going around to all of the mammography places in DC to see if they're accessible, and to do trainings for the mammography techs and how to work with people with disabilities. Do I need a license in DC? Oh, no, we don't consider that OT." It's like, okay, thank you. I think it's OT, but I guess a lot of places, they think that OT is only treating a person, not a place. But I was taught we treat people, places, and things. We make matches between them. So get a lot of leeway in some places. Who knows? Now, you also find attorneys in other groups and sources, and you may want to look at those locally and see what those are. I mean, again, things like houses of worship, they're there. The YMCA, your gym, wherever wherever you are, there are lawyers. They're everywhere. They're everywhere, and especially now. So it's just, talk to them, ask them what they do, and then couch what you do in terms of what they do and what they need. I would recommend doing an article in the legal throwaway paper. What's that? Well, the Florida Bar has the Florida Bar News. It comes, I don't know how often it comes, maybe every couple of weeks. And there's just, BS articles in there, really. There's like a page of legal stuff if you've been disbarred and they're letting you back in. There's, does anybody have anything to say about John Smith? There's also ads in it, lawyers advertising to other lawyers. They may allow non-attorneys to do articles in those. I don't know. But if they don't, partner with a lawyer and talk about it. I'm sure that lawyer wants to get his or her name out as well. So if you talk together about these services that person provides, maybe elder law services, and you work in concert with them to do aging in place, and why OT does aging in place better than anybody. The other thing that I would really recommend is doing we have CEUs, lawyers have CLEs, continuing legal education. And I would recommend trying to do a CLE for attorneys. Now, you may need to partner with an attorney because the requirements will vary from state to state. But I can tell you, the fact that I am an attorney and have to do that, but when the ADA first came out, I was doing CLEs like crazy for lawyers because they didn't know anything about the ADA. And I got a lot of referrals from them in order to do that. So you might need to partner with an attorney. Depending on the state, it'll have different requirements on who can do a CLE since it's continuing legal requirements. But you might find an elder lawyer who's doing presentations, and you do presentations with them on the keeping people safe part of it, prevention, basically what we do as as aging in place and the importance of it. But I see a real real place for this, and a real need to market in general, and then market to attorneys, and make occupational therapy kind of the sliced bread of aging in place as opposed to everybody else. Because of how comprehensive we are, we don't just look at the house, we look at the person's needs. And Karen and I were also talking the other day that depending on how you do home assessments, as I mentioned, if I do home assessments and I don't touch the person, then it's not OT in the District of Columbia. So I can ask people, lift your arms, do this. I can kind of see range of motion and some of that stuff. Obviously, I think it's important. I prefer to be a licensed professional, but it depends on how you're doing that. So I think there's certainly attorneys need OTs. They don't know it yet, and we need to explain it to them why they need us. It's a really good marriage to have attorneys working with OTs, especially in some of these areas. I would also recommend, you all don't do peds, but I think that's another area that's important. Where some of the home modification stuff for peds, parents don't know necessarily what to do to make their house more accessible. Yes, bye. I'm sorry. My kids come in, they know I teach online, so that's why. Are you teaching now? Anyway, so that's kind of all I had in terms of PowerPoint stuff. So why don't we have a discussion, some questions? Questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So I know this might sound really stupid, but I know the OT Practice Act. I live in New Jersey. I know what's legal for OTs to do and what's legal not for OTs to do, but I'm practicing as a home modification specialist, as an accessibility specialist, not as an OT. This is the model that I'm using. I got it from the Executive Certificate for Home Modifications. Who is it that would actually determine it, in God forbid a lawsuit, whether what I was doing was OT versus accessibility consulting?
I think the licensure board would be the ones that would determine that, and it would the way it would come up would be something like this. Excuse my French. You piss someone off and they want to go after you. And the easiest way to do that, because hiring a lawyer for malpractice for what you're doing would be kind of difficult. The easiest way would be to go to the OT licensure board and say, You know, she touched me, and I don't know, do you need a script in New Jersey?
No.
Okay, then it's not a problem.
Okay.
You're doing OT because you're an OT. I mean, you may say you're doing home mod and all this other stuff, but it's someone, you know, like let's say, you know, if a patient fell or something, they could sue you for malpractice as an OT. They just could, because you're also an OT. So you can't take away what you are. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I remain insured as an OT, but I'm still
Yes.
trying to promote myself not as an OT. And I know other home modifications people are doing that because we want to just get out there and work. We don't want to be locked into the rules and regulations with insurance and Medicare and Medicaid and all that with you know, that OTs find themselves in, whereas somebody who is a kitchen and bath remodeler does not find themselves locked into that, and they can get a job because they can move much more quickly without those restraints.
All right.
On
Well,
that.
we don't really have constraints of Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. If you're, you know, you can't bill Medicare unless you have a diagnosis and a prescription from a doctor. So if you are doing home modification, you know, if I decided that I wanted somebody to go to my parents' house and do a home assessment and redo whatever it needs to be done, because my mother wouldn't listen to me if I was the last person on earth, then that person is it's not eligible for Medicare or Medicare or Medicaid billing, because it's not medically necessary services. They're treating the house pretty much, as opposed to treating a person. So that's not an issue. If you have a diagnosis and you have a prescription from a physician, then if Medicare allows you to bill, you can bill Medicare. But otherwise, it's not a reimbursable service, and you don't have a problem. Medicare doesn't allow you to bill for things that are covered by Medicare. So in other words, if somebody came out of the hospital with a stroke and it's a relative of yours, and the relative calls you up and says, I'd rather pay you than anybody else. You know, I don't want anybody else. I want to pay you to provide me with home care, and they have all the money in the world. That would be a problem, because they qualify for home health services, and you can't bill them for a service that's Medicare eligible and a service that Medicare provides. There's a diagnosis, they're eligible for home health care. You can't see them privately.
And,
So you're
and
saying,
Karen,
go ahead.
right now Medicare has a big emphasis on falls. So if somebody has had a fall, then that would qualify them for medically covered services from their doctor. So that's if they're over 65.
Right, only if they have a diagnosis and a prescription. Medicare doesn't pay to prevent falls.
Correct. It doesn't pay to prevent, but it's actually asking doctors now to do an annual fall screening on any of their patients over 65. And one of the things that they're encouraging them to do now is refer to OT for a home safety assessment. So,
well, they may be encouraging it, but if it's not a medically necessary service under Medicare, Medicare's not going to pay for it. It is not one of the preventative services that was put in place in the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act added a bunch of prevention services. It covers now pap smears, it covers an annual physical, it covers a whole list of preventative services. Home assessments is not one of them. So unless you have a diagnosis and a prescription from a physician, Medicare doesn't cover that. Now, a lot of older people have diagnoses. So if they have a diagnosis and the doctor will write a prescription, I suppose that's considered medically necessary. I mean, that's the definition of medically necessary, is a diagnosis and a prescription.
I think the issue has been that if a client calls you up and you don't know how old they are and they don't know that they're covered by Medicare, and you go to them to go do a home assessment, then could you be liable for not having known that they were on Medicare and that that they had a diagnosis and a prescription, like if they hadn't presented it to you?
Well, ask them if they have a diagnosis and a prescription from their doctor.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have diagnoses, but a lot of doctors don't write prescriptions for them, and they're not relevant. 1 second. Oh, okay. Now I got a message that my internet was having problems. I don't know. I never saw that before. That was kind of weird. So, you know, a lot of doctors will write a prescription, and someone may have a diagnosis. Someone may be diabetic, and he writes a prescription. I don't know if Medicare will cover fall prevention for a diabetic who's 65 years old or 66. I don't want to take a chance on it myself if someone wants to pay me and doesn't have a prescription and a diagnosis. I don't, you know, that to me is prevention. It's not necessarily medically necessary. And that's going to be, that's what scares me, is someone coming back later and saying, this was prevention, it was not medically necessary. Now, if somebody has a stroke and the doctor writes a prescription, that's obviously medically necessary. And who determines medical necessity? It's usually a physician, but is the physician willing to, you know, back you up if there's an audit or something?
So I have a question, Barbara.
Sure.
You mentioned, you know, a national marketing plan, and that's something that we've discussed a lot. We're working on an app right now. I'm waiting for the developers to get back to me with some pricing. But if we were to do some sort of national marketing plan as HMOTA, I'm wondering what the best way to go about that would be. I almost feel like it would be to possibly connect with a national attorney professional, like workman's comp, for instance, National Workman's Comp Association or something like that, and connect with them as HMOTA, or Elder Law Attorney Association that's national. See if we could, you know, partner and, you know.
Well, one of the things you could do is you could see if you could give a presentation at some of the, like the National HMOTA Conference, or I'm sorry, the National Elder Law Conference. Now, as far as workers' comp is more of a state-by-state thing. So I can tell you, for example, Florida has a workers' comp conference that's the biggest party in the world, and everybody goes to it. Lawyers, OTs, PTs, rehab specialists, adjusters, insurance adjusters, rehab nurses. I mean, everybody who's anybody in workers' comp goes to that. They take over a couple of hotels in Disney World.
Wow.
In fact, I met another OT lawyer there in the elevator over a keg of beer. I don't drink beer, but it was in the elevator. And I hadn't met another OT lawyer at that point in my career. Now I know a bunch, but so, you know, that's a big thing. You might consider that. I just would prefer that the marketing be occupational therapists in this role, so that it distinguishes OTs from everyone else. I mean, you can have all those credentials, but I just think that it just makes it better if you know, to push OT.
Competition.
Yeah.
You know, we actually do have skills. We didn't just take a couple classes, you know, from CAPS
Right.
or.
Right, and that's what you know, that's what I would stress, that this is what we do. We look at people, tasks, and environments, make a match, and make people function as best as possible and prevent falls and prevent other problems. Nobody else does that. I mean, PTs can say they do, but they really don't.
And it's not in their scope of practice. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, they think everything's in their scope of practice, but we won't go there.
Hey, Barbara, I have a question.
Sure.
In terms of, so I've actually been writing to local newspapers, and trying to, you know.
Okay, let me tell you how you do this, okay?
Okay, that was my question, because no one has
Yes.
been getting back to me.
Okay, writing doesn't do anything. You find a reporter who's writing stuff that's interesting and, you know, has some rational relationship to what you're doing. So, for example, a reporter who just did a story on how Mrs. Smith and her daughter are finally getting along now that she's living with her daughter. All right, you call her up and you say, gee, you know, I saw this article and I wanted to tell you about some of the things that I'm doing to keep the Mrs.
Mm,
Smiths in their own home. And it's
mhm.
the same thing with TV reporters. You got to
Got
meet
it.
them where they go. And if you find out, you know, ask around, follow them on
Mm,
Twitter, direct message them on Twitter. That's one of the best ways to reach people.
okay. Okay,
I
yeah, I've
get
just been
people,
emailing like the editors, which I
no,
guess
no,
that's
no, 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 no. They don't even read that stuff. Um,
great.
and you also, you know, you find out like where they hang out, literally. You know, if you follow people's Twitter feeds, you'll find out.
Hmm.
I'm amazed at how I get the people I get to respond to me on Twitter. And this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but just an example. You know, I lived in South Florida for many years. I went through hurricanes, and when the hurricane hit Puerto Rico and we didn't do anything to help people in Puerto Rico, it really upset me. So I saw that General Honore, who was head of uh, the Katrina efforts in New Orleans, he was
Hmm.
also interested in what was going on in Puerto Rico. So I would tweet to him, he would tweet back, and he started tweeting stuff to me to retweet, and I would retweet it to Rosie Perez, who's the
Hmm.
actress who lives in Brooklyn. her, her
Hmm.
her Twitter handle's Brooklyn Rosie or something like that, and she has gazillion followers. So he
Mm.
would tweet to me and I would get it going. And, you know, General Honore, he's like a big deal. And he was like my best friend all of a sudden. So it's amazing who you can reach on Twitter. And
That
that's
makes
really,
sense.
you know, what you want to do.
Okay, thanks.
And the same thing, you know, with the local reporters, the local TV people, you know, even if you're in Chicago, I would do it. You know, I mean, yeah, it's a big place, but they do a story on something that is remotely related to home modifications and aging in place, contact that reporter and say, you know, I saw you did a story on someone who was you know, older person who was defrauded in something, because they always talk about that stuff. I want to tell you how I'm helping to protect older adults. It has nothing to do with it, but it's the same subject. And you might
Got
get
it.
their interest. So that's how I would do it.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
What are your thoughts on, you know, the model of working in home mods where you work with contractors and get a percentage of whatever the work they're doing, or, you know, bring in somebody and get a percentage of that versus yeah, working with them in some other way? I don't know.
I think that's a good thing to do. My only concern, and this, you know, sometimes the lawyer comes out in me, is to make sure that you are equally insured if somebody, you know, if they do something and someone gets hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So they probably have some sort of insurance. You need to make sure that your insurance covers you for their screw ups. And it may not be a screw up. It may just be that, you know, maybe they painted the bottom step yellow and the person's colorblind and didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And theoretically, you would have asked that question, but maybe you didn't because you don't think, you know, you don't always think about that because everybody paints the bottom step yellow if you're going to paint it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Okay.
you know, that's the kind of thing where in theory, you should have, you know, we as the OT should have thought of that more than a contractor,
Mm-hmm.
because that's like a, you know, quasi-medical thing. So we should have asked that question. So is the contractor going to point a finger and say it was her fault or his fault and not our fault? So you just need to make sure that you have whatever agreements you have, you know, either you indemnify each other or your insurance covers what you do, and you know, if someone else does something that screws up, if you have joint liability, that you're covered.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
I've got a question,
Sure.
Barbara, about the PLLC versus LLC. I went through the SCORE program and got like a half hour of free consulting with an attorney, and he recommended that I become a PLLC and go
All
through
right,
my
let me cut you off right away.
Okay.
That's a state designation. All right. So I can tell you that where I'm licensed in Florida, we don't have a PLC. I don't know what that is. We have LLC. So I really couldn't, you know, I can't answer that because it's going to vary
Okay.
state by state. But I can tell you, I just finished putting together the second part of my presentation for occupationaltherapy.com. SCORE has wonderful mentoring. SBA has mentoring. The women's business centers have mentoring. And there's another, let me see if I can, am I still sharing the screen? Because I don't, can you take the
Yes,
screen
you are.
back? Yeah, or if you could take the screen back, because I want to see if I can open this PowerPoint. Just say there's one other organization that does mentoring, and I just don't remember the name of it. So let me just, okay, thanks. So let me just find this. Let's see, mentors. Come on. Okay, the other one is, there's one called, wait, I gotta move this over. Sorry. Oops, I gotta move this over. Okay. Stop. Okay, got it. Okay, there's a group called Uncommon Individuals Foundation, www.uif.org, and they have an entrepreneur mentoring program. And then the others that if you go to www.sba.gov and then /local-assistance, you know, with an ANC at the end, local-assistance/find. You'll be able to find SCORE mentors, small business development centers, veterans business outreach centers, in case any of you are veterans, and the women business centers, and they all provide mentors.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. There's the other thing I found that I thought was really neat was it's like how to do a business plan, an online business course, okay? And it's called Dream Builder. And if you just Google Dream Builder, and it's supposed to be for women, but I think it works for women and men. So that's something you might want to look at too, is Dream Builder. And you can just Google Dream Builder. And SBA has tons of videos and all kinds of stuff. And so does SCORE. I mean, I found some amazing resources on the internet.
Can I ask you also something else that HMOTA's starting to do is
Sure.
get into selling some products through dealers that handle the product. So what are your thoughts about that legally for us?
Again, I would be concerned about liability for the products. You know, if anything, if the person, so let's say you did a home assessment and you said, I'm ordering 3 things for you. I would want to know that you showed them how to use them, that you did everything you could to make sure that if they got hurt, it's their own fault and not your fault. So, you know, let's say you, you know, you got some sort of a device that helped people get in and out of the bathtub, but it was some, I'm making this up, okay? But you didn't have to screw it into the wall. So there was something that you could screw in, like that went over the ledge of the tub that screwed into the ledge. I'm making it up. And you said, order this and your son will put it in. That would concern me, that he didn't know, you know, didn't put it in right, to make sure that if you do it, that you're doing it right and you're covered for what you did. You did everything you could to make sure that what this, you know, this was safe. So you practice. So in other words, you know, look at the malpractice setting. If I came in and was testifying and said, well, I would never say, have your son put this in. I would want to make sure it was done right myself.
Right.
So that's what you want to make sure, that whatever you're ordering, it's the right thing. They can't hurt themselves with it, that kind of thing. And if you're going to have an agreement with the company, that you just make sure that that agreement is a sound agreement.
Okay. And so as long as the client knows that you're doing it and you're recommending this, but you're making money off it, it's okay as long as you've told them that it's disclosed?
Yeah, you know, the only thing about the making money off it issue that would be more of an ethical issue as an OT.
Mhm.
And it also might, depending on what your license says, it may be an issue with your OT license, because there may be something about, maybe considered a kickback of some kind. And I can't advise you on a licensure law because they're all different.
Mhm. Yeah.
But that might be an issue for you, that it says that you can't split fees, for example. That might be considered splitting fees.
Mhm. So it'll say that in each person's state, the OT licensure law would say that.
Yeah, if you look at in the licensure law where it gives a list of things you're not allowed to do, it might say that. It might be worded in a way that it doesn't like come out and say it, but it does. Some states incorporate the AOTA Code of Ethics into their licensure law, and there might be something in the AOTA Code of Ethics about that too.
Actually, there is quite a bit in the AOT Code of Ethics, and it's about transparency and doing what you feel is ethically correct. You should really look it up. We sent it out with the essential luxuries information, and it's exactly what the AOTA states. It's on their website. So if you're concerned, you should really look it up.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff, it's kind of funky because the hospital can do that. If you work in a hospital, the hospital can buy a device or a widget for $25 and sell it to you for 50. It sell to the patient for 50. And that's okay for them, but it's not okay for us.
Mhm.
You gotta read it. And the only reason I said might be is because I don't have the code memorized, but I kind of think it's probably there. So, and you say it is there, so I defer to you.
Thank you.
It says in there that we can sell products as long as we are doing what we feel is best for. Really, people should look it up and not take my
Yeah,
word for it.
yeah. Whenever you talk about law or ethics, you've got to read the words and
Yeah,
interpret it.
good.
The other thing is, if you are billing Medicare and doing that, that may be a problem because it may be considered kickbacks. And I would not do that if I was billing Medicare, because kickbacks, that's a problem. You end up with a QTAM thing, and you can really get in trouble for that stuff. I have a whole lecture where I show mugshots of OTs who've done bad things under Medicare. My students love that. I tell them this is the scare the daylights out of you lecture. These are what not to do.
What's the biggest thing you shouldn't do under Medicare?
Probably bill for things that you didn't do. And that may seem pretty obvious, but it's not obvious to some people. Some of the other things people do is they have a non-OT do something and they bill it as an OT. That's a common one. But the billing for things that are not covered is another one. And I don't know how people do this stuff. I mean, I feel guilty just thinking about it. Thinking about other people doing it. I would never do any of that stuff. But there was an article that came out recently. There were two OTs who were working for a nursing home. I think it was an OT and an OTA on one of the big chains. And they went to treat this woman, and she said, honey, I'm dying. So I'd rather spend the rest of my time with my family. Why don't you go treat someone who really needs it? And when that woman said that to them, that really had an impact on them, and they realized that they were treating a lot of people who didn't need OT. And it's still under the rules before the PDPM, so the more minutes they got, the more they could bill. So they realized that they were treating all these people who didn't need therapy, and they turned the company in to Medicare under the QTAM law, fraudulent billing. And they got fired, and it was hard for a while, but once the case was over, they got to split, I want to say $3 million.
Wow.
So when you find fraud and you report it, you get a piece of the action. So it was well worth it to them. They're both in private, they're in private practice now. But I'll suffer for a few months for $3 million.
Yeah. Well,
Can
Barbara,
I,
we could probably
can I,
wrap it up. It's getting late. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. I know that I found it very helpful, and I think a lot of people here did.
Well,
I would love to have you back again, or maybe just, reach out to you to consult about possibly a national marketing plan.
yeah, I'd really like to talk to you about that. I really think it's critical because, like you said, everybody thinks they can do aging in place, and the idea is that they can't. And if there's a way, if we could get an OT on Good Morning America or some of those things, I think that's important. As crazy as it sounds, I think it's really important.
I think it's vital.
So, I don't know if that's something that the president of AOTA would be interested in, but she's got the title, and someone kind of in that league would be good. So we'll see.
What do you mean, real
I-
quick, would be good? You think she would be able to get on Good Morning America?
She might be. I'll talk to her. We have publicity people and press people, and it's just a matter of picking the right person. One of the things that we're trying to do, and I don't know if this group wants to get involved, the work that I did with the American Association on Health and Disabilities with mammography centers, we thought it would be a really good idea. We could get some national press for OT if we had all of the OT schools send their students out in Breast Cancer Awareness Month in October to do assessments of mammography facilities. And the assessment that AAHD put together is online, so everybody can download it free and just send all the students from all the programs out to do an assessment of one mammography facility in October. And since HOTA had breast cancer, we thought maybe HOTA, we could go on, have the president of AOTA and the president of AAHD go on whatever show HOTA's on. What is she on? Today Show, or I don't know. I confuse those. Have her, have them go on and talk to HOTA about making mammography facilities accessible to people with disabilities. So, that's an idea that we're working on.
Also, September is, sorry, it's Lauren. Also, September is Falls Prevention Month. And
well,
that
let's plan something now. And
Yeah.
What's interesting is that I think that AAHD would probably work with you on that too.
AAHD?
Yeah, the American Association on Health and Disabilities
Okay.
would work with that as well. So maybe that's something that we can work towards, is a fall prevention thing. In fact, I did a webinar it's online for for United Spinal Association on fall prevention, what the evidence shows. And of course, we all know the evidence shows that OT is the only thing that works. And that presentation's up there somewhere on United Spinal's website. But when I did that, I got the National Council on Aging and COA contacted AAHD and said, why don't you guys do a presentation for Falls Month for all the NCOA webinar stuff? So we did one for the National Council on Aging. So they might get involved. That's something.
That's a good. I'd like to interject really quick. The National Council on Aging just put out an email today from the U.S. Senate. They put out a letter asking for input from stakeholders. And I posted it today on the HMOTA Aim Big website.
Oh, nice.
And so I'd love if everyone would go look at it, but they're asking for input from all the stakeholders involved in fall prevention. And they're looking for ways that that they can, ways to decrease falls throughout the country. So I feel like, I don't know if we should all email them separately or if we should come up with one cohesive email from our group, but I feel like this is a really good opportunity.
All right. Can you show that? Because when you give comments, it depends on what they put out. So for example, if they're doing a regulatory change, they count every click. So when they do regulatory change, you write something up and you send it to 50 of your friends and you tell them copy and paste this in the at this link. But if they're not doing that, it may be better to have a letter signed by everybody in your group with your own companies plus 50 of your friends. So is it possible to pull that up to look at, Karen?
Do you have it on your computer, Melissa? Because this is a different computer and I don't know what my website is or how to get
I have
into
it on my computer. Yeah.
Can I make you the presenter?
Sure.
Okay, here it comes.
Okay. Can you see it?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's see. All right. Over the next several months, the agent committee will examine best practices in fall prevention. Scroll down. Let's help guide is inviting stakeholders to provide recommendations. Okay, can you go down to the questions, the next page?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, report and follow. To what extent are falls reported? What learning tools and resources can be used? How can the Welcome to Medicare be improved? Evidence-based practices, polypharmacy. All right, so here's what I think we should do. I think that
Mm-hmm.
you should send this to AOTA and allow AOTA to comment on it too, okay?
Okay.
Then, oh boy, we need the evidence for my webinar. Are there evidence-based practices that reduce the rate of additional bone fractures among older adults who have fallen or broken? Are there regional differences? Are there models?
CPC, Karen, has put some stuff together as well, recommending occupational therapists based on the evidence.
Yeah, so that needs to be here. So basically what you need to do for these kind of comments is you go point by point. Can you scroll down or up? Scroll back up.
Yeah.
You go point by point and you address each point. And if you want to write something up that everyone will sign on to, I'll be happy to look at it from the perspective of a policy person who used to work on the Hill and make sure you framed it well. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Great.
I would hit each area, and I would also look at who else is in this space. Can you send this? You know what? Well, AOTA is probably better. I just, because of my background in policy, I mean, the Rob Wood Johnson Foundation spent a lot of money to train me to do policy, and AOTA has never asked me to do anything. So I asked to be appointed for the rehab section as the policy person. It's the special interest section. So they just appointed me to that. It would be good, you can't say all the sections. That doesn't make sense. Who else can you send this to in the OT world that would not be, kind of duplicitous? I mean, I would send this to Chris Metzler at AOTA
Okay.
and say, Chris Metzler's the VP of policy and stuff like that. So put in the subject matter, Senate Aging Committee asks for comments on fall prevention. All right, so send that to her. And her email address, let me just see what her email address is. Okay, her email address is C Metzler, C-M-E-T-Z as in zebra, L-E-R at AOTA.org. So send that to her with the subject line, Senate Aging Committee requests comments on fall prevention. So AOTA will write something, your group will write something, but we need to get a lot of OTs saying that this is OT and why OT is important.
Okay.
So the question is, who else can we send this to? It's kind of duplicitous if you send it. Is there an aging or geriatric special interest section?
Yeah, there is productive aging.
Yeah, what I would do is if you know somebody.
There's also a home and community SI, a special interest section that a lot of this would fall into.
All right, I would send it to them and I would tell them in the email that we sent this to Chris Metzler, so we assume AOTA will be responding, but it will be very helpful if we get OTs from around the country to respond to this.
Ooh, we
And
know.
I'm actually my name is Jackie. I'm actually part of the Home and Community SIS communications coordinator, so I can
go for it.
make sure that I can pass this over to.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. What's your
And you know what
email?
else? If you can email that to me, and I'm just Barbara Kornblau at Gmail, I'm going to put it up. I'm going to put it in the Gero for OT. You know, the OT for OT groups? Are you familiar with those? If you're not, in case
Yeah.
you're not familiar with those, there's OT for OT that started, and then there's everything else. So it's OT number 4 OT, Gero number 4 OT, public health for OT, home mod for OT. I'm going to put it up in the home mod and OT for OT groups, and I'll put it on my webpage.
Awesome.
So if you can send that
Oh
to
my God.
me, and I think I'm also going to, I'll try and tweet it as well and put it on Instagram.
Oh, good. Okay.
And then,
let's get it out there. And when you send it out as the communications person, what I would do is send it out and say something like, comments are important. They're easy to write because you're an expert in this. You know what you do, and you're more of an expert than the person that's going to read it. So you need to fill out as much as you can, you know, addressing their points, and talk about how great OT is and what OT does, and if you have any evidence-based articles on it. And if you have them, you can send it out with it and say, just put these articles in. Here's what they say. And if we flood the aging committee, let me just tell you a quick story. I know it's getting late, but when the ADA first came out, there was something that came out that said, if you need help figuring out reasonable accommodations, you can contact a rehab counselor, a PT, rehab counselor or something else. And we weren't there. And I was head of the work program special interest section at the time. So I wrote to everybody and said, write to this person and tell them to put OT in. So the final came out and they put OT in. So there was something else that was coming out, and I wanted to make sure OT was in it. So I found out who was in charge, and I called that person. And she said to me, did you organize that writing campaign to have OT put in that other thing? I said, yeah. She said, look, next time just call me, tell me, and I'll do it. She said I had to answer them all. So, you know, so if they, you know, once they'll know it, you know, they'll feel it. If they start getting emails, you know, from OTs all over the country.
Great.
And you know, you guys look like you can really get this moving.
Yeah, I think we can. In fact, well, let's have a committee meeting on that on Monday, and I'll send out
Okay.
the notice for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and talk more also about Fall Prevention Month. And if you want, I'll talk to Roberta at AHD, because she would like, you know, she would love something like that. And I'm also, actually, I'm on an NCOA panel in June. Let me see when that is. I thought it was June 14th. Maybe it's, let's see, June 7th. Oh, I'm in May. No wonder. When, I don't know, it's not, is it the 18th? Yeah, the 18th, I'm on a NCOA's national conference. I'm on a panel, Women Aging with Disabilities. When I'm there, I'll talk to them too and see if they would work with us on this. You know, if they would sponsor.
Fantastic.
That would be awesome. And anything
now,
we can to help support.
Now, do you want to do something similar to what we're trying to do with the breast cancer thing? Do you want to get students from schools to go out and look to home visits, or
for National Falls Prevention? I think that would be wonderful. That would be a perfect thing for HMOTA to sponsor. And we've got a lot of connections. A lot of people here, for instance, Sue, I know Sue's a professor, and there's a lot of other professors in this group.
Yeah, and you can always put it out on the, I can get on the program director's listserv if you're interested. So let's talk a little bit more about that too, because what would be helpful for that, because like for the one for breast cancer, we're giving them the assessment tool. All right, it's free, it's available on the website. I don't know if you have anything like that that you're willing to share that the students could.
We have a basic one.
Yeah, Karen, my recommendation would be to use a very basic screening thing, and maybe they could meet people at senior centers or stuff like that versus trying to go into all their homes, or look at accessibility. There was something that was at AOTA conference on the early aging or rapid aging of homeless people and how homeless shelters also are high risk for falls and aren't accessible. So that would be a high piece
that
for
would be
fall prevention too. Yeah.
And everybody at homeless shelters to do accessibility assessments.
Yeah, that's huge
Yeah.
because when I worked in acute care, I mean, that was everyone kept coming back from shelter saying that they wouldn't provide any of the accessibility. It was just a mess.
Well, why don't you all think about the direction you want to go? We'd have to start, it's already almost June. We're talking about September, so we'd have to do something quickly.
Well, we'd have to get it to schools while they're planning their fall semester. So that would be graduations this weekend, basically. So
if not students, couldn't it just be OTs as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be great.
You know, if it's
and I can talk
cutting too close for now.
Yeah, I can talk to Wendy Hildebrandt, the AOTA president, and see if AOTA would, kind of publicize it as well.
Yeah, like OTs in different areas that we could eventually do students if this isn't the best time.
Well, no, I mean, I think students, we can put it out for students as well. I mean, I teach at Florida A&M. I Skype into class, and my students could do something like this. That wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and I think in the homeless shelters,
it could be the sodas and the soda groups instead of for a class.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And in terms of the Christine, in terms of your question about supervision, if they were working off a generalized safety checklist versus making specific recommendations for a client, then that would get past the supervision.
Yeah, and it's a learning experience. You go out and you look at what's there, and you can talk to faculty if you're going to make recommendations and discuss what those would be. So.
Yeah, I had my students do ADA audits of public buildings. So, and I wasn't there for all of them. We just did the training.
But also, we need to meet next week, both regarding this letter and also the National Fall Prevention Week, because that is something we need to get in place right away. As you said, this is where people are starting to plan. Again, Barbara, thank you so much. It's so exciting talking to you. You've got so much fire. It's just wonderful. And I'm so proud that I get to be an OT and you're an OT.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.